Purpose, a caring approach to business.
Welcome, everybody!
Safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection. A quote by the brilliant and dynamic Gabor Mate. Welcome to Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business by Pillar Nonprofit Network. I am your host and winter beachgoer, Mariam Waliji. I am also the Social Enterprise Program Manager and Coach here at Pillar. If you're new here, Pollinating Purpose is a show all about supporting organizations who seek to create social impact through their work. Whether nonprofit, for-profit, or grassroots organizations, you'll learn key considerations to starting and growing your organization in a long-term and sustainable way. This month, we'll be sitting down to chat with Jennifer Martino of Crouch Neighbourhood Resource Centre here in London, Ontario. Jennifer is the Executive Director of Crouch Neighbourhood Resource Centre. As a child, she lived in the London Middlesex social housing, where she developed an early passion for community building and social justice. This passion led her to complete a BA in International Development and an MA in Latin American and Caribbean Studies at the University of Guelph. Jennifer has worked and lived in various Latin American countries, specializing in community development and implementation of educational technology. She has also worked extensively with rural and remote Indigenous communities on the use of technology to enhance cultural and educational programming. Since 2019, Jennifer has lived the mission of Crouch Neighbourhood Resource Centre, where she works to build a healthy community where everyone belongs and can access resources with dignity. I have had the opportunity to connect with Jennifer many times through the work of organizations that I'm a part of, and it's always an incredible experience hearing Jennifer speak about how to build meaningful relationships and connections within communities. I am thrilled to have her here today. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. Okay, so before we dive into all of these beautiful questions about partnership, can you share a little bit about what Crouch does and what you do and the work that you've done with partnerships?
Yes. Crouch Neighbourhood Resource Centre is a grassroots neighbourhood-based organization, and we're in the Hamilton Road neighbourhood of London, which the core of that neighbourhood is between Rectory and Egerton and Hamilton Road, but there is a bigger catchment area that we serve. And we are one of 5 neighbourhood resource centres in the city of London, and the entire city is covered by at least one of the neighbourhood resource centres, and we're all here to support the well-being of residents in the neighbourhood that we serve.
Amazing. And yes, you and I have got the opportunity to work together through Urban Roots London and things that Crouch does together. So it's always been really beautiful to see the work of the community center and the ways in which you approach partnerships and partnering with organizations. So I'm thrilled that we have the chance to talk to you today. So kind of on that note, how do you see partnerships build up the work for the community? Really, what is the value of having partnerships with the community?
Well, the truth about a place like Crouch is that we couldn't do anything without partnerships. It was actually born out of a partnership with the London Public Library, and I learned this recently. I started as an executive director 3 years ago, right before the pandemic, and I noticed a plaque on the wall before the library shut down for the first time, and it explained that Crouch is the name of the founder of the London Public Library system. And so even the name of the resource center is tied to the foundations of libraries as a place where people can go as a community space, access resources, find out more about what's available in their neighborhood. And there was a woman from the neighborhood, Mary Sterneman, who is still a very active member of the London community, and she went to the library and said, I'm concerned about things I'm seeing in this neighborhood, and I'm just one person, but maybe if we work together, we can start something and we can change things. And the library embraced her, and they decided in 1970 to form a group called Crouch that would tackle many of the challenges in the neighborhood and try to uplift things. And from there, in the 1990s, Crouch became an independent charity, but stayed within the Crouch Library. And we've received in-kind donation of space there since 1970, which really helps to leverage, the budget that we get from foundations and from donors. And it also means that we don't have any of our own operating space for programs, but we partner on every single program that we run with the library or with the City of London through the Hamilton Road Senior Centre or with other local organizations such as churches.
I don't think I knew that history of Crouch. Like, we've worked together for so long. That's fascinating and beautiful because it's the foundation of partnerships is what has driven the work, and it's such good work that Crouch does. That's so cool.
Yeah, and not just the foundation of partnering, but of hearing an idea that emerges from the community and saying yes first, and then figuring out how to get it done. And I think that's something that we're still living 50 years later. We just had the 50th anniversary of Crouch during the pandemic, so we didn't get to celebrate it the way we may have liked. But 2020 was 50 years of thinking about what the neighborhood wants and needs from the people that live there, and then saying, I think we can do something with this. Let's see who else wants to get involved, and then making it happen.
And okay, so that is such an important part that you just touched on. Like, often when we think about building partnerships and the relationships involved, we think about connecting with those organizations to that like can complement and support the work. But what about those communities being served, and like how, like what does it mean to actually partner with those communities and like listen to them, and how do you go about doing that work as an organization?
And often when community members come forward, they have their own networks and their own resources. And so there is something to be said for partnering with like-minded organizations, certainly, and that's kind of the path of least resistance to maybe building momentum. But once you have good relationships with other organizations like we do with the library and with the City of London and with Egerton Church, for example, then when community members bring ideas forward, we're able to ask them, who else do you have in mind that can support realizing the vision that you've put forward? And very recently we had one of my favorite examples of this. We had the Crouch Block Party, and there was a resident that I knew just from chatting with her briefly here and there over the years, and we couldn't do a lot of that because of the pandemic. And she came up to me at the block party and said, I have always wanted to have a craft fair because I'm a craft vendor and I know lots of other people from the neighborhood that create things in their homes. Do you think we could do something like this but support local vendors? And so she actually did all of the work of finding the vendors from the neighborhood and connecting with them and asking who would like to be a part of it. She ended up assembling a team of 14 local people who make the most beautiful crafts. And I mean, things that you would expect to find in a high-end market or here downtown. And the part that we were able to bring as a neighborhood organization was that we have the partnership with the city where we were able to use the entire Hamilton Road Senior Center to host that craft fair, which meant we had 3 different rooms to work from. And we were also able to leverage a partnership that we have with TD Bank, where they help us cover costs of things like meals for people so that any event that we have doesn't have any economic barriers, at least. We can't be no barrier. We try to be as low barrier as possible, but we're also able to leverage some funding through the federal government with the My Main Street Community Activator program to have local musicians come and play live at the event. And it just ended up being this really beautiful community experience that came from one neighborhood resident coming forward and saying, I've had this dream for a long time. I can't do it on my own, but can we work together? And over 200 people came that day. We got really good feedback from the vendors who said that they felt it was well organized, really well attended, that they loved the music, most of which was actually in other languages, which is something that you don't always hear unless you're looking for that kind of thing. And I would say that in that case, we really did partner with that resident because she had a leadership role that was critical to the success of the program. And you have to have trust in people when they come forward and they say they can do something. And we had that, but also she really came through in a big way.
Amazing. Yeah, that speaks to so much of when you're trying to support a community and you're trying to support these groups of people, it involves listening, and it really involves deep listening, because a lot of the time these folks have the experience to actually really understand what's needed and what's wanted, and can share how to actually facilitate that. You as an organization might have the tools and the resources to actually implement, but to really understand what the need is, it involves conversation and it involves chatting with those folks. That's such a beautiful story.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I think it's also important to remember that none of us have a monopoly on good ideas. So just because you work in a nonprofit sector and you get paid, thankfully, to think of really nice things that you can do in the community and how to meet needs, that doesn't mean that the people with the resources or access to those resources can be the only ones that come up with things that can really make a huge difference in the community. And sometimes you have to just move forward and show people and build trust with the community first to say, we want to do things that involve you and that are for you and that really take advantage of what we already have here. But that encourages people to come forward. And what I hope is that through that experience, other residents will see that we take resident ideas and concerns and dreams seriously, and that we can turn that into something together that will be much better than we could ever do as a team on our own.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned something, and I feel like you may have already answered this kind of throughout some of your answers already, but you said, you need to build trust with the community. So how do you actually, if someone's doing this for the first time and they want to build trust with the communities that they want to support, what are some ways that they can approach that? Like for you and for Crouch, you have such a long history of working with communities. How do you approach building trust?
Mm-hmm. I think a learning from this experience is that when you work full-time in the non-for-profit sector, you have a certain way of working. And when you work with partners who are also employed full-time, there are certain expectations you have about how people come to tables and how prepared they are for different forms of collaborating, and even things like working hours, right? And ways that we communicate through email that for some people isn't something that they do at all. And so it could be that the best way for a person in the community to communicate would be through Facebook, for example. And so we have to really be mindful of that and supportive, and when we're working with people in the community, think that they're always bringing forward the best version of themselves that they have to offer that day, and also be clear about expectations on both sides, and just talk openly and honestly about any challenges that come up, but most importantly, not giving up when it's challenging, because I think so often we talk about things like resident-led initiatives, but what we mean is that we brought people to the table as professionals, we guided a process, people showed up and they participated to some degree, but was it really resident-led, or did we leave it as the people who are used to being in charge?
Yeah.
And so what I hope that we've done over this last year, but especially the spring and the summer and the fall at Crouch, through the community events that we've been focusing on, is showing that we will push through challenges, and we will work in ways that are not just good for us, but also good for the people that we serve and the people that we're working with. And most of our volunteers right now are people who also access our basic needs programming. And they do a really great job because they know what it's like to be on the other side of that table. And you do need to think about how you interact with different types of volunteers differently, but that everybody can play a role and have vision, have great ideas, and make any experience richer than what we ever could have done if we just did it as the professionals by ourselves.
Yeah. So often when I'm chatting with folks and through programming or coaching or whatever it might be, it's this idea that, you could have formal education, or, you may have gone to business school or whatever it might be, but the value of lived experience, which leads to lived expertise, is so valuable, and that always needs to be at the table when we're looking to partner with organizations or we're looking to partner with communities, because if we're just operating on the assumption that we know best, but we don't actually know best, there's so much opportunity for harm that can happen. So how do we ensure that we're creating space and safe and meaningful space for those folks to come and participate is such a big part of partnering with folks. And it's always been so beautiful to see the way that Crouch does that. It's something that I've always admired. Amazing. Okay, so we kind of chatted a little bit about this as well, but beyond like that component of building trust, what would you say are some of the other important considerations when building partnerships with, either community or community organizations?
Yeah, well, we just talked a little bit about expectations. And so those can be things like boundaries or expectations around when we work and the ways that we want to work together. And I think that needs to be more of a negotiation than an imposition, especially dealing directly with community members who don't work in the space. But when it comes to other nonprofits, that's really important as well, to talk about what do we expect from each other and to what degree are we partnering or collaborating, or is this a joint venture? And I think we use the term partnership to mean all of those things, but it isn't, right? So, and I really started to think about that through conversations with Stanislav of the Glen Cairn Neighborhood Resource Center, because he was very proud of our partnership during the early days of the pandemic with the COVID Care Package project. And what he was most proud of was that he said, this is really at like the far end of maximum collaboration, where we were actually sharing resources, not just kind of executing a project together, but separately. So we lost all access to our operating space when the libraries closed during March of the pandemic. And I immediately contacted Stanislav, and he said, sure, you guys can come into the warehouse. He was the only one working on site at that point. So we went with our team. He had the space. And together we were able to deliver 40 hampers that first week, right to doorsteps. And then we saw that need was growing and this problem wasn't going away as quickly as we would like. And so the next week we were able to put 80 of them together because he put out a call to his community volunteers. Some of his staff came back. He had board members show up, and we were able to use his entire warehouse. And then we started putting in funding proposals together once the COVID support relief came out from places like United Way. And when the project got too big for that, we walked across the street where Youth for Christ was also operating kind of a meal program delivering to houses. And they said, well, we have a huge building. We're only using our kitchen. Why don't you take our entire auditorium? And then we looked at how could we leverage their resources, because they operate a cafe. They were able to actually order wholesale, direct, and get food delivered at a time when it was impossible to get your hands on food. I don't know if you remember that, but you could only buy one or two of each thing at the grocery store, which wasn't meeting our purpose, especially as we geared up to support over 200 houses a week.
Yeah.
And so that's an example that I think is pretty rare and takes exceptional circumstances like a pandemic, where organizations again say yes first to the proposal, and then figure out as we go, what does everyone have to bring to the table, but also how can we get support that will benefit all the organizations and make sure that we're all able to continue functioning. And I mean, that's something that I think is a vision of the London Community Foundation. They have the Vitality grant that really focuses on who else you're going to work with, for example. And more funders are starting to ask, hey, this is great that you have this project on your own and in your own little corner of the world, but what are you doing to make sure that you can leverage the expertise of other people, including people with lived experience, but also sharing resources. And that's something that we're being really mindful of as we think of our next opportunities.
Yeah, it kind of comes to that idea of like an ecosystem, right? Where you have all of these people, you have all of these players who are skilled and grounded in what they do well. And it takes all of that to really make this function work in a fulsome way, in a way that's sustainable and long-term and best supports the community. Because at the end of the day, we exist to try and make these things better. And we can't do that if we're trying to be all and do all things, because it's just not sustainable for one organization or one group of people. And yeah, Stanislav is the best. He's just like a gem.
Yeah. And it's a natural place to start with people that you've worked with before, or the people that you find at the same tables. But something that I really like about what I'm seeing in London now is that people from different, let's say, areas of concern or different impact areas in our community are coming to the same table about issues. And for example, there's a multi-sector conference right now on homelessness and health. And people from the library are going to that table, people from neighborhood resource centers, people from places like ARC Admission, people from the city homelessness response. And sure, many of us already know each other, but when you bring a mix of frontline workers, executive directors, people who are employed by the government to all come together and think about how we can approach a very complex issue that is really embedded into our urban ecosystem, then we're much more likely to get ahead. And we can each do our little things to make a difference for individual people, but things like this really take a coordinated approach. And it takes sharing time together, but in a format that really takes into consideration all voices and not just the voices of leadership. Because we all have, and often the frontline workers have the most to contribute to these conversations.
Totally. I mean, there's 2 points that I think of when you're sharing this, and one is that there is such intersectionality in these issues that, like poverty, food access, food security, housing, like they all intersect and they contribute to each other in ways that it needs to be that multifaceted approach to actually make progress on them. And yeah, that idea of leadership, leadership isn't always like leading in front. If you are a leader, like, that position of leader in an organization, it's sometimes leading beside or like going behind and just offering those supports. So, that practice of really understanding, not necessarily that there isn't hierarchy, but that each person in the circle has important value and knowledge to contribute. So where are we centering those people in the conversation to make use of that knowledge, and in a way that allows for those voices to be heard?
Yeah, I actually saw a TikTok yesterday.
Love it.
That really made me laugh because it was somebody explaining office culture.
Okay.
And they explained that there's this thing called C-suite, which are the CEOs and or what a nonprofit usually called executive directors, and that their primary purpose is to waft around and be seen and make sure that people see them doing the things that are actual work that gets done. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was hilarious because there is some truth to that, where the people that you hear from the most, like you're hearing right now, are from the people that have those titles. But it really, we do need to hear from the people that are doing the frontline work, and honor their knowledge and their expertise. That does not certainly always come from their education. Sometimes it does, but a lot of that comes from lived experience. And something that I'm really proud about at Crouch right now is that every single person on staff at this moment has lived experience with the issues that we're dealing with. And one of the reasons that I was so happy to land at Crouch Neighborhood Resource Centre after I worked at United Way for a couple of years is that London is my hometown. And I grew up as the oldest of 5 siblings, single mother, and we lived in the Booley Street housing complex. And so under London Housing, on what had just become named Ontario Works at that time, and we used many of the resources in the city that Crouch is now able to bring into that Hamilton Road neighborhood, such as the food bank. Yeah. And working with other people who have had very similar experiences to that, I find that it makes a difference when people come to our door, because we're not othering people in the same way that you might, even unconsciously, if you've never had those experiences. And we have a very high standard of customer service where everyone who walks up to our door should be able to access resources with dignity. And that's the phrase that made it into our mission statement in our last round of strategic planning, where we, in some sense, are a broker. We're kind of the middle person between community members and the resources that they need and really have a right to. And we're in a very fortunate and humbling position to be able to extend those to people. But it's important that our team never lose touch with where we came from, where we are, and the privilege that it is to now hold the resources that we used to have to ask for ourselves.
Yeah, amazing. That is a beautiful way to be able to work. Okay, so very quickly, you shared so much about the incredible work that Crouch does. Where can folks find out more about Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center?
Yeah, well, we have a website, www.crouchnrc.org, or just on Google, you can Google Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center. And then also you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at CrouchNRC, and then also on Facebook if you just look for Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center. And what we mostly try to share are some of the really good news stories from the neighborhood, and there are so many of them coming out now, especially with all the leadership that we're seeing from local residents and volunteers. And there will be lots more to come, but I would encourage people to check out the brand new mural that we just put on the side of the library, 16 by 8 foot mural, hand painted by a resident, Shane Wilcox of Studio Shim. And we just thank him so much for consulting with community members to get ideas about that, and then making the dreams of our community really a visual reality on the side of a building that is so important to all of us in the neighborhood.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, Jennifer. It's always lovely to chat with you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Jennifer for joining us from Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center and for sharing the approach that they take when partnering with communities. It is such a beautiful approach, and one that I'm thrilled to have been able to learn from in the past in the ways in which we've worked together. If you would like to learn more about Pillar Nonprofit Network and the work being done by our organization, you can head on over to pillarnonprofit.ca. If you're interested in learning about Pillar's network approach and how we choose to engage with our network and membership, you can head on over to network.pillarnonprofit.ca. Once again, I am your host, your guide, your business bud, Miriam Moligi, and this has been Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business. Thank you for coming along for the ride, and I am so thrilled that you're here.